Mustafa, céad míle fáilte ród tá mé an sásta a bheith ag cainte lása aniu, just 100,000,000 welcomes and solidarity and love and support to you and to your cause from Belfast, Ireland. And thank you very much for doing this podcast with me. So I know you now, well, I know of you for decades, but I know you now just over 10 years. We met in your office in the West Bank in 2014, if you remember that. And you're the Secretary General of the Palestinian National Initiative. You're a medical doctor, you're an activist, and you're head of the Palestinian Medical Relief Society. You're a member of the PLO and of the Palestinian Legislative Council. And you advocate for change on the basis of non-violence and civil disobedience. And you're married to Rita, who's also an activist, and your daughter, Gia. Gia, incidentally, is the Irish word for God. So you may tell her that. So how do you, just at a personal level, as a family man, as a father, as a husband, how do you and your family cope with the relentless horror of what's happening in your home place?
Well, it's not easy, but I must say I feel blessed because I have a very supportive family. And not only supportive, but they themselves share lots of similar views. And they are themselves have been active in Palestinian struggle and also in building up Palestinian strength, if I might say, use the word actually. So my wife was the founder of the Birzeit Community Health Institute, and she graduated hundreds and hundreds of students who became very capable health providers. And I think we share a lot of social and political values, which makes it much easier to do the work we do. But of course, we are all we've been always busy. We've been always sharing the suffering of our people, but nothing is to be compared with the last 2 years, because the horror that is happening in Gaza is just beyond description. And I don't talk only politically, because of course I am so politically involved in what's happening in general and in trying to defend our people and save the lives of so many people in Gaza who are dying around the clock. But also I am, as you know, I'm leading a very important medical organization, Palestinian Medical Relief Society, which has at this moment 80 medical teams working around the clock in Gaza, treating about 200,000 people every month. And they are doing tremendous work. And through them, we learn around every day what's going on and all the suffering and all the challenges that the people are facing there. And these are heroes. I mean, whatever we do, it's nothing to compare with the heroism of these wonderful people who are starving and yet do not stop working, treating patients, helping families. They themselves suffer because they are unable to provide what's needed to their children, but they don't stop.
Well, I might come back to that in a few minutes, but just for our listeners and viewers, Mustafa, give us an outline of the history of Palestine since the Nakba, since the catastrophe in 1947, please.
Well, I think what this war with Gaza revealed, what it has done is that it broke us all back to the roots of the problem. For a while, it looked like the issue is only the occupation of West Bank and Gaza. And that if that occupation ends, then the problem is resolved. Because so many people were consumed with the idea that the Zionist movement could be accepting a compromise with the Palestinian people called two-state solution. In reality, they don't. And this war has proven that they don't. And actually, it brought us back to the roots. And the roots are that this Zionist movement that we are facing today, that is oppressing us, is nothing but a settler colonial system. A settler colonial system that tries to eliminate the presence of the Palestinian people, the indigenous population of Palestine. In a way, some of them think that they can repeat what was done to the indigenous population in America. And this whole story started at the end of the 19th century when the Zionist movement was created and supported by certain imperialist political groups, especially British ones. They created an alliance with the evangelical Zionist tendencies and started settling in Palestine. I mean, that's the reality, the truth. And then, of course, they abused the terrible suffering of the Jewish people during the Second World War, who were subjected to the Holocaust. And of course, they abused also the fact that many Jewish people suffered from the anti-Semitism in Europe and the pogroms in Russia, etc., etc. And in 1948, they felt that with the support of Britain, which issued the Balfour Declaration, that discriminated against the indigenous population, said that Palestine would be the national home for Jewish people, excluding Palestinians, without saying that Palestinians also have the right for a homeland, the place they lived in for more than 4,000 years. But in 1948, Israel was created following a partition plan, which was issued by the United Nations in 1947. And that partition plan spoke about giving Israel a Jewish state on 54% of the land and Palestinians state on 44% of the land. What remains was going to be an international zone for 5 years, including Jerusalem and Bethlehem. But that was not a very just resolution, given the fact that what Palestinians were given was 44%, while they at that time were in control of 82% of the land. And the population of Palestine was the Palestinians, regardless of all the immigration of Jewish people from Europe, Palestinians were more than 200% the amount of the Jewish population. Still, Israel itself rejected the partition plan also. And the war broke out. And in 1948, Israel conducted what is, in my opinion, the essence of the Zionist movement, which is the ethnic cleansing of 70% of the Palestinian population of Palestine. So not only a Palestinian state was not created, 70% of the population were evicted and became refugees. And in the process, the Israeli establishment destroyed and erased to the ground 523 Palestinian communities. That explains what's happening today in Gaza. Because in reality, after Israel occupied also the West Bank and Gaza in 1967, the settler colonial system continued to try to do in the West Bank and Gaza what they have done before in 1948 areas. What I'm trying to say is that while many of us thought we could get to peace and some sort of justice, not full justice, but accepting to have a state in West Bank, Gaza, and East Jerusalem, which is only 22%, less than half of what United Nations decided we should have, although we accepted that, Israel didn't. And so now what you can see, they claim that the West Bank is also a pure Jewish land, and they want to evict everybody from Gaza. They want to annex Gaza. So practically, we are talking here about a settler colonial project. I'm sorry for the length of what I said, but it's a settler colonial project that is not fulfilled without ethnic cleansing of the Palestinian people. That's the reality of the Israeli governments we are dealing with.
Well, thank you, and don't apologize for the length of your answer. It's important that those listening and watching this podcast get from your point of view the history of the current calamity that's facing the Palestinian people.
By the way, it's important to mention that originally the Palestinian movement, represented at the time by the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, accepted or was calling for a solution that accepts the Jewish people. And the solution was going to be one democratic state in the whole of Palestine, where everybody lives together in equal rights and with equal duties. The problem is that this was not accepted by Israel. And so many Western governments pressured the PLO to accept the alternative, which is a two-state solution, an unjust solution where we will have a state in West Bank and Gaza. But that's also now is rejected. So that's the meaning when Israel opposes the recognition of a Palestinian state. Why do they oppose it? Because they don't want to see a Palestinian state. So in reality, in summary, today on the land of historic Palestine, regardless of the fact that 70% were evicted from that land, 7.3 million Palestinians live versus 7.1 million Jewish people. So what's the solution? If Israel does not accept two states where we would have our own little small state, and they don't accept one democratic state, which in my opinion is the best solution, then what is left? Their solution is ethnic cleansing.
Yeah, well, I've long had the view that the Zionist government is about, as you have put it, annexing the Palestinian territories and expelling the Palestinian people. We may come back again later and look at this notion of one single democratic state versus a two-state solution, because it clearly isn't a solution. I mean, in my limited travels there, it struck me just as totally unworkable that you would have the little strip of the Gaza Strip, and then totally separate from that, the West Bank, partition, divided, and so on. But let's stay, before we come back and look at solutions, let's stay with the reality of life on the ground, the ongoing bombardment, the genocide, using, on the one hand, American munitions and bombs, using, we got intelligence recently that the British Royal Air Force was doing intelligence flights, did over 50 intelligence flights on behalf. So for the heads of these big states to, on the one hand, decry what's happening, but at the same time, they're actually part of the genocide. They're part of what's happening. What in terms of the daily suffering, and I want to deal with, for a moment, the focus on the starvation of people on top of the blanket bombing and the other assaults. In Ireland, we had An Gorta Mór, which means the Great Hunger, in the mid-1840s. And sometimes it's described as a famine, but it wasn't a famine because there was plenty of food, and the food was being exported at the same time as the people were dying. And it's not a famine in your country either, because the food is there, and the Israeli government is refusing to let the supplies go in to the people who need it. So could you give a description of what's happening and your sense of the plight of people there?
Well, since October 23, Israel initiated a terrible war on Gaza, and it is committing 3 war crimes in parallel. The war crime of genocide, the war crime of ethnic cleansing, of course, and the war crime of collective punishment, including starvation. We need to talk about each of these aspects so that your audience can understand what's happening. But let me, before talking about starvation, just explain one thing. During these terrible 21 months, Israel has bombarded Gaza with no less than 110,000 tons of explosives. Gaza is a very little area. I mean, it's only 140 square miles with 2.2 million people living there now. And the size has even shrinked further to less than 20% of the 140 square miles because the rest was completely destroyed. 110,000 tons of explosives is more than 5 times the explosive power of the 2 nuclear bombs that were thrown on Hiroshima and Nagasaki during the Second World War. 110,000 kilograms of explosives is like 56 kilograms of explosives for each man, woman, and child in Gaza. And of course, many children don't weigh 56 kilograms to make it clear. All these weapons came from the West. 90% came from the United States of America. But the rest came from countries like Britain and Germany. And the devastation is beyond description. 93% of all homes have been destroyed. 93%. The total number of people killed or injured is I estimate the number of people killed to be almost 100,000. Those who are registered are 62,000. There are 10,000 that are missing under the rubble. But then the rest of the 100,000 are people who died because of diseases or died because vaccination was not allowed for children for almost 190 days. And in addition to that, people died because there is no treatment for their diseases. In addition to that, there is 145,000 people who were injured, many of whom will die, many of whom will remain disabled. If you count together, you are talking about 10% of the population. Just imagine, apply that figure to a country like the United States of America, and you will be talking about 33 million people, proportionally 33 million people injured or killed in the course of 22 months. Can you imagine what would have the United States done if that had happened to them? Nevertheless, as if all this bombardment is not enough, and the destruction of people's homes, there are no homes left there. But in addition to that, they imposed a siege on Gaza. And that siege is depriving people from everything, from clean water, from food, from sources of energy, from gasoline, and the starvation is just beyond description. We are talking today at this very moment while we are talking about 188 people who died of starvation so far. 94 of them were children, but that's nothing in comparison to what will happen. According to UNICEF, 200,000 children now at the edge of death because of starvation. According to UNFPA, 500,000 people could die because of the starvation and because Israel is preventing food from getting to Gaza. The fact that they don't allow clean water to get to Gaza has led to so many diseases. According to our medical colleagues, every person in Gaza gets sick 4 times every month. And one of the doctors told me he takes Flagyl, which is an antibiotic for enteric infections, every day, because without it he's sick all the time. So Israel is practically not only bombarding Gaza with what could be measured as 4 nuclear bombs, also they are causing a terrible biological warfare, depriving people of water and food, which depresses the people's immunity and causes so many diseases. And then they prevent vaccines from getting to Gaza so that children would be vaccinated, which threatens us now with very serious epidemics like measles, like tetanus, and most dangerously, diphtheria and poliomyelitis that we have eradicated 30 years ago.
So, how does this end? If you could encapsulate in 3 or 4 sentences, if it's possible, what needs to be done? What are the steps that need to be taken to bring this to an end from the point of view of the global responsibility of the rest of the world?
The most important thing is to stop this terrible war, to stop the war and immediately impose a ceasefire. And not only a ceasefire, but a stop of the war, that the war must end. It's enough. Any continuation of the war will lead to just more disasters, including elimination of a whole nation, basically. Second, we need immediate opening of the borders so that the thousands and thousands of trucks with humanitarian aid can get to Gaza. Gaza needs today 1,000 trucks of supplies to deal with the terrible humanitarian crisis that they have. Israel is not allowing, in the best case scenario, more than 30, 40, 50 trucks, which is nothing. And then these trucks get stolen by gangs that collaborate with Israel. It's a horrible, horrible situation. So what we need is end of the war, immediate supply of water, clean water, food, flour, medications, medical material, and immediate supply to hospitals. We have patients who need kidney dialysis who will die because because they cannot be treated. We have cancer patients who don't have medications. We have patients with hypertension, diabetes, who also don't have medications. So all of that is needed immediately. And then after stopping the war, it will become our responsibility to find ways of reconstructing what Israel has destroyed, including, by the way, 94% of all hospitals and clinics in Gaza.
Okay, just for the Irish people listening or watching this, the Gaza Strip is about the size of County Louth. It is, as you say, a very small area. Now, there are rumours and talk and news reports about negotiations. Could you give us some insight, or at least your view of what's happening there?
Well, negotiations were basically about to be, finished with conclusion of a temporary ceasefire agreement that would have allowed the exchange of prisoners, where 10 Israeli prisoners would be released, and a number of about 18 bodies would also be released in exchange of releasing some of the 12,000 Palestinian prisoners in Israeli jails, not more than probably 1,300. And the deal was about having a ceasefire for 60 days and then negotiating a final ceasefire and the end of the war during that period of time. After, I think the Palestinian side was ready. They approved the agreement. but it was the Israeli government that undermined it and changed they stopped practically the negotiations. And who took the responsibility of breaking that possibility, of killing that option? It was Witkoff, the American envoy, the American envoy, Witkoff, who was supposed to be, a mediator. He helped the Israelis destroy that possibility or that potential of an agreement. And in my opinion, it's important for the Irish people to know that the Palestinian side is ready to release all Israeli prisoners immediately, all of them, not in portions, in exchange of releasing at least some of the Palestinian prisoners. We are talking here about, as I said, 12,000 Palestinian prisoners, including 400 who are there with life sentences. Some of them have been in Israeli jail for 40 years. So that is the only way of ending this terrible situation. An end of the war, release of all prisoners on both sides, or at least some Palestinian prisoners, to be realistic, because we know Israel would not release all of them, and initiate then a process of reconstruction. That's the only way. So it's not the Palestinians who are refusing to release the Israeli prisoners. I think Netanyahu and his government, which is a fascist government in every sense of the word, it's a fascist government. They don't care about the remaining Israeli prisoners. They don't care about their lives. And the proof to that is that they killed some of the Israeli prisoners by bombarding the areas that they were in, where they were living.
I think it's important to restate, because obviously in the West, there is a focus on the hostages, as they're called, the prisoners that the Palestinian militants have captured. It's very important to restate what you just said, that those who hold those prisoners stand ready to release them. That there's no reluctance on their part as part of a negotiation to move in the direction that you have outlined.
And by the way, the remaining 20 prisoners should be called prisoners of war because they were captured in a fight. And they are all soldiers. They're not civilians. So if Israel calls them captives, fine. Then what do you call the 400 Palestinian children in Israeli jails?
Yeah.
Aren't they all captives too? Or how do you call the 3,650 Palestinian prisoners who are in Israeli jails, being tortured, by the way, and starving, who have never been subjected to a legal process? They are all held under the so-called administrative detention, which means they are held without charges. They don't know why they are in prison. If they call the Israeli prisoners, the 20 of them, captives, fine. But they should call all these thousands of Palestinian prisoners also captives.
And tell me this, if you can, what's your sense of the mood within the wider Israeli population about this ongoing catastrophe?
Well, there are two things that one has to mention. First of all, I feel very sorry for the fact that we lost anything that could be called the peace camp in Israel. Unfortunately, in Israel, what you see is a shift to very, very radical, very extreme racism, not only in the government, but unfortunately at the level of the public. When you have 64% of the population of Israel saying in a new poll that they don't think there is any innocent person, any innocent human being in Gaza, including 1 million children. They don't think they are innocent. They don't think they deserve to be treated in a human way. When you see that, you see a true shift towards fascism that we didn't see anything like that since maybe the rise of Nazism in Germany at one point, which Jewish people became the first victims of. So that makes me very sad, because this tendency of terrible racism and extremism is horrifying. And I want to say here, just for your audience to understand, that nothing from what I told you is against Jewish people as people. And I personally know more than probably many other people that how much Jewish people suffered during the Holocaust and during the anti-Semitism in Europe and during the pogroms in Russia. But we Palestinians were never part of any of that. We never had anything called anti-Semitism because we are Semites too. And the best times that Jewish people had was with Palestinians and with Muslims, either in Spain at one point of time, or in Palestine itself, or in the other Arab countries. So, but I always say, and I want every Western leader to hear that the Holocaust happened in Germany by the Nazi Germany, not because only of the aggressive behavior and the terrible ideology of the Nazis themselves, but also because of the cowardness of so many leaders and politicians in Europe, including in Britain in particular, who were cowards and allowed the Holocaust to take place before standing up to Hitler. And the same kind of cowardness is what we suffer from now when people watch the slaughter of a whole Palestinian population in Gaza and do nothing about it. I don't see a difference between those who were silent about extermination of Jewish people and those who are silent today about extermination of the Palestinian people. And I always say there is no difference between Anna Frank, who was a Jewish little girl executed by the Nazi Gestapo, and the Palestinian Hind Rajab, who was 6 years old with 6 members of her family in one car. She watched all her family members being killed, and for 2 hours she was calling for help. And when the ambulance tried to get to her, it was bombarded and she was also killed. Anna Frank and Hind Rajab are the same. They're both innocent children, and those who killed them are criminals, whether they are of Jewish origin, of Israeli origin, or of German origin, or of any origin. And that's what I think the key point for the justice for Palestinian people is one specific thing, which is to accept us as equal human beings to Jewish people, as equal human beings to Irish people, as equal human beings to British people. That's the key to solving the problem we live in. But there is another side now in Israel, which is now growing only, especially during the last 2 months, because of the unbelievable, wonderful global solidarity with Palestinians, because of what you do in Ireland, because of what people do in Britain, because of what grassroots are doing. We've seen yesterday an amazing demonstration in Sydney, in Australia, with 300,000 people. Because of that, you see now many politicians in Israel, including previous prime ministers like Naftali Bennett, who is also an extremist, but many of these people are now saying that Israel has reached a very low point, and it is now classified as a pariah structure. Because of the terrible crimes that are happening. So you can see a beginning of an awakening among many Israelis, especially some Israeli leaders who are not in government, that this government in Israel, the fascist government, is dragging Israel into a terrible, terrible black hole.
And what's your sense, Mustafa, of the mood of the Palestinian people, either in Gaza Strip, in the city or what remains of it, or indeed in the West Bank, because there are ongoing attacks on Palestinians in the West Bank as well, perhaps not to the same extent as in the Gaza Strip. But what's your sense of the mood? If you're out in the street now and you meet your neighbors or you meet your friends, what's the sense?
It's a mixture of several different feelings, but thank you for asking about West Bank, because in the West Bank now we are facing terrible, terrible situation where gangs of Israeli illegal settlers who are armed to their teeth by the Israeli government are attacking Palestinian communities every day, burning houses, burning cars, shooting people. Up till now, 10 Palestinians in the West Bank were shot to death by the Israeli gangs, terrorist settlers. And this is growing. 40 communities have already been evicted in the West Bank as well. And the Israeli declared policy is to build settlements everywhere and to kick out Palestinians. And there is an act of economic suffocation of the Palestinian economy by the Israeli government, confiscating Palestinian resources, confiscating our tax revenue, and also huge amounts of arrests against people. No less than 18,000 arrests took place since October 7th. And more than that, the West Bank is now cut into pieces by 1,000 military checkpoints and gates. When I say a military gate, that means that a whole community, a village or a town, will be shut off by the Israeli army, and then it becomes a little prison. So life is in terrible situation. But if you ask me about the feelings of the people, you have people who feel depressed, who feel frustrated. You see a lot of people who are afraid of the future, afraid of what might happen to us. Will we be subjected to the same kind of catastrophe that happened to us in 1948 or not? But at the same time, you see a great amount of determination, an unprecedented level of resilience, and determination that we have no other alternative but to struggle for our freedom, that we cannot live with this oppression. We cannot continue to live in this fear and this terrible frustration. And one cause of frustration, one anger, is related specifically to two specific groups of countries. The first one is the West in general, and especially Western governments that abstained from supporting our struggle. And here comes the feeling that where is international law? The feeling of being betrayed. I personally feel betrayed. People feel betrayed. We have, during the last 40, 50 years, we've met so many politicians from the West who kept teaching us about democracy, about human rights, about international law, international humanitarian law, nonviolence, etc., etc., etc. And then I ask, and people ask, where are these people? Why are they silent about the worst and most horrible violation of international law? Why this level of double standard when you compare 11,000 sanctions against Russia in 3 months or 2 months and none against Israel? But the other anger is towards our brothers, Muslim and Arab countries, governments. Of course, we know the peoples of these countries are totally with Palestine and Palestinian people, but there is a great amount of frustration because people feel that the Arab and Muslim governments should have done much, much, much more than what they have done.
Well, there is obviously a need and justifiable anger at the refusal of these other states to uphold international law. I mean, that you could boil all of this down to asserting, upholding, and implementing international law. That would deal with a lot of the difficulties that you have outlined. And the counter to their refusal, of course, is the growing solidarity, the growing popular movements across the world, and particularly here in Ireland, where there's a real connection, a heart connection with the Palestinian people. And there are different initiatives. The Occupied Territories Bill is making its way very, very, very slowly. And you were recently at a big conference in London, the Global Alliance for Palestine. There were over 70 solidarity organizations from 25 countries, and you spoke very movingly. How important is that initiative or initiatives like that?
It's very important because this is the factor that will change the parameter, the international solidarity. There are two important factors that will save us as Palestinians. Our determination to survive, our struggle for our freedom, our resistance to injustice. This is the first most important factor, and without it, we would not have seen any international solidarity. But the international solidarity that is coming to help now, which reminds us with the solidarity with the Irish people in their struggle against injustice, and reminds us with the international solidarity that broke the apartheid system in South Africa, or the same international solidarity that supported the people of Vietnam when they were bombarded by the United States of America. It is ironic that, but it's also very indicative that the demonstrations we see today in support of Palestine are so large and they are unprecedented since the demonstrations against the aggression on Vietnam and the South African apartheid system. I think that means a lot, and it really shows how insightful was Nelson Mandela when he said at the time of the liberation of South Africa that the Palestinian cause is becoming the most important cause of human justice worldwide. So I believe Palestine is there now, and this solidarity is very important. And it's not strange to us that we feel how much the Irish people are in solidarity with Palestine. I was myself honored to give, that I was asked to give a main speech, a keynote speech at the celebration of the 50th or the commemoration of the 50th anniversary of the Bloody Sunday in Ireland. And I was there, and I could feel the solidarity of the people, because we are all in the same boat. We are all in the same boat with those Jewish people who struggled against Holocaust, by the way. And it's not strange that some of the survivors of the Holocaust are with us in this solidarity movement. So in my opinion, what happened in London recently is very important because it talks about the creation for the first time of this wide global alliance for Palestine. And I hope, and you spoke there, Gerry, and you gave a wonderful speech. And Jeremy Corbyn did the same, and people from South Africa as well. I think it's an indicator that humanity is there and that progressive forces in this world are still capable and will do their best to save the future of the Palestinian people, like they did for other countries.
I think it's important to single out the leadership of the South African state and government led by Cyril Ramaphosa and leading the legal case. I think that's important when you mention Nelson Mandela, that the people there who went through all of this with the anti-apartheid movement are making a stand. But I'm also minded, and I don't think that anyone from outside of Palestine, not me, not anyone else, can, tell the Palestinian people how to conduct your struggle. We're there to support you and so on. But I have to say that there's an urgent need for all of the Palestinian liberation movements and resistance groups and parties and civil society to unite, to have national unity, because the solidarity work will be accelerate it, because a united Palestinian leadership will inspire those of us who are trying to build a global campaign. And in many ways, these efforts to end the apartheid, to end the occupation, to end the genocide and the starvation, they're codependent on Palestinian national unity. So what's your view on, one, the importance of that? President Abbas and others have a responsibility. What's your notion of how that can be? Well, first of all, do you think it's important? And then secondly, what is the potential for that being achieved?
Of course, it's very important. And the party that I belong to, Palestinian National Initiative, was always distinguished by the fact that how much it cares about unity of Palestinian groups. And we were the ones who were calling all the time with some of our other leaders like Haidar Abdel Shafi, who's highly respected in Palestine. We were calling all the time for a unified Palestinian leadership. And we were all the time calling for democracy within the Palestinian internal system, because people have the right to choose their leaders freely and democratically. But unity is very important. And that's why we were instrumental in the negotiations that created the first and only national unity government in 2007, which I was the spokesperson of at the time. And that government included Fatah, Hamas, us, and most other political groups. And now we went all the way to Beijing to reach an agreement of national unity. And I personally drafted that agreement, which I think is the most realistic way of achieving unity as soon as possible. That agreement was signed by all political groups in Palestine. But unfortunately, the authority is not implementing it. And I think the authority is subjected to a lot of pressures from outside by those who don't want the Palestinians to be united. And I think the way out of this situation is really to create a Palestinian unified leadership. No struggle can succeed without unity. And that is why we will continue to do whatever we can to convince our colleagues from different groups that what Palestine needs more than anything else is unity between all its forces. And I hope we will achieve it eventually. The issue in Palestine is different from many other countries because so many outsiders, so many outside countries play games inside the Palestinian structure. And they try to prevent us from getting unified because they know that if we are unified, we are much stronger. But that will not deter us from continuing our efforts.
Well, in Irish we say, "In yart go curla hela," unity is strength. Now,
and I want to thank you, Gerry, and I want to thank Sinn Féin for the fact that you have been trying with us also to help in convincing different groups in achieving unity.
Thank you, Mustafa. I might, all being well, at some point we'd come back and do another podcast and look at potential settlements or solutions. You mentioned that the Palestinian National Initiative favored a one-state solution with everybody being treated equally. There's the other current position of a two-state solution or settlement, and we might come back and have a dedicated look at those. The main focus now was to provide you with a platform at this critical time, and I want to thank you for giving us your views so eloquently. And I want to invite you to say whatever you may say about anything or some point that we may have missed, just to give you that possibility. And at the end, of this, we are going to put up a contact for the Palestinian Medical Relief Society for anyone who wishes to donate to that and the good work that it is doing. So, Mustafa, you can have the focal Geranach, you can have the last word, please.
Well, I want to thank you for giving me this opportunity, and I want to thank the Irish people for their solidarity with Palestine. And I can see that solidarity with Palestine is becoming a widely accepted or approach by all Irish people, even with their political differences. I just saw the statement of the President of Ireland, who spoke about imposing sanctions and using the UN laws to stop what Israel is doing. And I met him before, and I think I appreciate really that position. But my most important thing is that I want to thank all Irish people for their support and solidarity with us. I'm not surprised. I always say that to my colleagues. I'm not surprised that Irish people understand us better than anybody else, mainly because you've suffered from what we are suffering from. Mainly because you suffered from the same colonial policies that led to our problem. And I think we share a lot of pain, we share a lot of memories, we share a lot of suffering, but we share, most importantly, a great amount of hope that eventually we will succeed and we will overcome. And I promise you, nothing will break us as Palestinian people. Nothing will stop our struggle, whatever it takes. And one day, we will be able to celebrate together the freedom of Palestine, as you have done in Ireland. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa. And Dr. On, Michael D. O'Higgins speaks for all of us on this issue. Thank you, Mustafa. Go well. Solidarity. Salam.